The silver Porsche Taycan pulled up to the curb, its electric motor emitting a sound like a contented sigh. Julian Vance, his wife's boss, stepped out, a man stitched together from magazine advertisements for success. He thought the car made him look powerful. He didn't know that the quiet man watching from the living room window, his wife's unassuming husband, was the one who had designed its chassis, engineered its battery array, and held the patents that made its existence possible. Within 3 months, Julian's world, built on the illusion of power, would be dismantled by the very man he so casually dismissed. It's a strange feeling, watching someone try to impress you with your own creation. Have you ever experienced something like that? A moment where you hold a secret so large it feels like a physical weight, while someone else dances in blissful ignorance. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy watching arrogance meet its match, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and ultimate vindication. Now, let's return to that evening, where the seeds of a spectacular downfall were being sown in the fertile ground of contempt. Ethan Ashford watched the scene unfold with a practiced stillness. From his vantage point, he could see his wife, Clara, smile as Julian opened the passenger door for her. It was a dazzling smile, the kind she used to give him when they were first married, a smile that had grown increasingly rare in their quiet, comfortable life. Julian, ever the showman, leaned against the car, one hand casually resting on the roof, his posture a carefully constructed billboard of ownership and pride. The car was an Ethelred Valkyrie, the pinnacle of electric hypercar engineering, and Julian treated it like a trophy, a symbol of his ascent. To him, it was just the most expensive, most exclusive toy on the market. To Ethan, it was the culmination of a decade of sleepless nights, of risky investments, of pouring his soul into metal and carbon fiber. It was his secret, his legacy, and it was currently being used to ferry his wife to a dinner he wasn't invited to. "Ethan, darling, we're leaving," Clara's voice floated in from the hallway. There was a brittle brightness to it, a forced cheerfulness that had become her default tone when Julian was near. Ethan turned from the window, composing his features into a mask of mild indifference. He walked into the hall, where Clara was adjusting her silk shawl. She looked beautiful, her dress a shade of deep sapphire that complemented the cool silver of the car waiting outside. She avoided his eyes, focusing instead on a microscopic piece of lint on his shoulder, which she brushed away with a flick of her fingers. "Have a good time," Ethan said. His voice was even, betraying none of the storm gathering inside him. Julian chose that moment to step into the doorway, filling the frame with his tailored suit and expensive cologne. He gave Ethan a look that was a masterclass in condescension, a quick, dismissive up-and-down glance that took in Ethan's simple trousers and cashmere sweater and found them wanting. "Ashford," Julian said, the name a verbal pat on the head. "Keeping the home fires burning, I see. Good man." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look friendly but was engineered to assert dominance. "Don't wait up. We've got a table at Elysian Fields. Big night, celebrating the new waterfront deal." Elysian Fields, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost more than Ethan's monthly mortgage payment, a mortgage he could have paid off in a single transaction 10 years ago, but maintained as part of the carefully constructed facade of his life. He was Ethan Ashford, humble architectural consultant, a man who was, in the eyes of men like Julian, utterly unremarkable. "Sounds impressive," Ethan replied, his calm a stark contrast to Julian's vibrating self-importance. Julian smirked, mistaking Ethan's quiet for intimidation. "Oh, it is. It's all about momentum, you see. You have to keep moving forward, keep acquiring. Like this car." He jerked his thumb toward the Valkyrie gleaming under the porch light. "You know what it takes to get one of these? It's not just money, it's influence. They don't just sell them to anyone." Ethan felt a flicker of grim amusement. He knew exactly what it took. He had personally reviewed the final list of the first 100 approved buyers. Julian Vance's name had been on it, pushed through by a dealer in Miami who was known for catering to clients with more cash than class. Ethan had almost vetoed it, but his CEO, Marcus Thorne, had convinced him that the brand needed a few peacocks to raise its public profile. "Let him show it off, Ethan," Marcus had said. "He's free advertising." "It's a beautiful piece of machinery," Ethan said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Beautiful? It's a weapon," Julian declared, his chest puffing out. 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. The torque is, well, you wouldn't understand. It's a different world, the kind of power you can't appreciate unless you've earned it. He looked pointedly at Ethan's 10-year-old sedan parked further down the driveway. The insult was so blatant, so cartoonishly arrogant, that it almost looped back around to being funny. Almost. But then Ethan saw Clara's face. She was looking at the ground, a faint blush of what he hoped was embarrassment on her cheeks. But she said nothing. She didn't defend him. She didn't challenge Julian's boorishness. She just stood there, a silent enabler, caught in the gravitational pull of Julian's success. And that silence was more cutting than any of Julian's insults. It was a small betrayal, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. In his pocket, Ethan's fingers closed around a small, cool piece of metal. It was a keychain, a miniature replica of the brushed titanium emblem that adorned the center console of every Aethelred Valkyrie. His personal sigil, a stylized EA that was his private signature on every car his company produced. He squeezed it, the sharp edges digging into his palm, a tiny, secret pain that grounded him. "Well, you two should get going," Ethan said, his voice impossibly steady. "You don't want to be late for your celebration." Julian grinned, victorious. "Right you are. Come on, Clara." He placed a proprietary hand on the small of her back, guiding her out the door and toward the passenger side of the Valkyrie. Clara glanced back at Ethan, her expression a confusing mix of apology and pity. It was the pity that stung the most. She thought he was being left behind. She had no idea that he was the one who owned the road they were about to drive on. As the car pulled away, its sleek taillights disappearing into the night, Ethan stood motionless in the doorway. The quiet of the house settled around him, no longer a comfort, but a cage. The humiliation was a cold fire in his gut, but beneath it, something else was beginning to smolder. A patient, calculated resolve. Julian Vance had just made a very powerful enemy. He just didn't know it yet. The slow burn had begun. The silence that followed their departure was a living thing. It filled the spaces they had just occupied, echoing with the things left unsaid. Ethan walked back into the living room, the scent of Julian's cologne, a cloying, invasive presence. He looked around at the life he had built with Clara. It was a life of curated modesty. The furniture was tasteful, but not extravagant. The art on the walls was from local artists, not international auction houses. It was the life of an architectural consultant and his marketing manager wife, a comfortable existence in the upper middle class. It was a complete and utter fiction. Ethan walked over to his bookshelf, which was filled with volumes on architectural theory, urban planning, and structural engineering. He ran his fingers along the spines, a familiar comfort, but his hands stopped on a thick, leather-bound volume with no title. He pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than it looked. He placed it on the large oak coffee table and opened it. Inside, there were no pages of text. Instead, it was a hollowed-out compartment containing a sleek, encrypted tablet and a set of keys. Not house keys, but keys that belonged to a world Clara and Julian couldn't even imagine. He picked up the tablet. The screen glowed to life, showing the logo of Aethelred Automotive, a stylized phoenix rising from a gear. He entered his credentials, and a cascade of information filled the screen. Real-time production data from the factory in Nevada, global sales figures, performance telemetry from their Formula E racing division, and with a few taps, He could access the live diagnostics of any Ethelred vehicle on the planet. He typed in the VIN for the Valkyrie that had just left his driveway, a number he had memorized the moment he saw it on the purchase order. A satellite map appeared, showing a small, silver icon moving smoothly down the highway toward the city center. He could see its speed, its battery level, the G-forces it was pulling on the turns. He could, with a single command, disable the vehicle completely, leaving it a $2 million brick on the side of the freeway. The thought was tempting, a brief, satisfying flash of petty revenge. But that wasn't his way. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and his was still in the early stages of preparation. It needed to be a masterpiece of culinary justice, not a microwave snack. His anger wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and precise, like liquid nitrogen. It wasn't Julian's predictable arrogance that fueled it. Men like Julian were a known quantity in the world, like bad weather or traffic. You planned for them, you mitigated them, but you didn't let them consume you. No, the true source of his pain, the wound that refused to close, was Clara. He remembered their early days. He had just sold his first architectural firm, a small, innovative company he'd built from the ground up. The sale had made him a wealthy man overnight, but he told Clara he'd simply taken a consulting role with the larger corporation that had acquired it. The lie had started as a form of protection. He had seen what sudden wealth did to people, how it warped relationships and attracted predators. He wanted a life with Clara that was real, built on shared values, not on the foundation of his bank account. For years it had worked. They were happy. They had dreams that felt achievable because they were scaled to their apparent means. The idea for Ethelred had been born from his two great passions, design and physics. He saw the electric vehicle revolution as the next great frontier of industrial design, a chance to blend form and function in a way that hadn't been possible with the internal combustion engine. He used the fortune from his firm's sale to secretly found the company, hiring the brightest minds in engineering and battery technology. He was the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand guiding the entire enterprise. He was Mr. A, the mysterious founder known only to the board and his most senior staff. To the world, and to his wife, he was just Ethan Ashford, a man who drew blueprints for a living. For a while, he had managed to balance both worlds. But then Clara had taken a job at Julian Vance's real estate development company. At first, Ethan had been pleased. It was a step up for her, a chance to manage bigger projects. But he quickly saw the change in her. She began to talk more about money, about status, about the things they didn't have. She started to see their comfortable life not as a success, but as a failure of ambition. Julian's world of ostentatious wealth was a constant, glittering temptation, and it was slowly poisoning her. She began to look at Ethan with a subtle disappointment, as if he were a project that had failed to launch. He had considered telling her the truth a dozen times, but how could he? "Darling, you know how you've been feeling embarrassed by my lack of drive? Well, it turns out I'm secretly one of the most successful industrial entrepreneurs of the decade." It sounded insane. The lie had gone on for too long. Its roots were now tangled around the very foundation of their marriage. To reveal it now would be to admit that their entire life together had been a performance. His finger traced the path of the silver icon on the screen. It had arrived at the restaurant. He could almost picture the scene. Julian handing the keys to a fawning valet, striding into the opulent dining room with Clara on his arm, the center of his own universe. He would spend the evening boasting about his deals, his influence, his car. And Clara would listen, her admiration a mirror reflecting his own inflated ego. Ethan closed the tablet and placed it back in its hidden compartment. He put the book back on the shelf. The house was once again just a house. He was once again just Ethan Ashford. But the decision had been made. The masquerade had served its purpose, but it was now becoming a prison. He had tolerated the slights, endured the condescension, and absorbed the quiet betrayals for the sake of a peace that no longer existed. He had been patient. He had been still. But Julian, with his careless cruelty, and Clara, with her silent acquiescence, had finally mistaken his stillness for weakness. And they were about to learn, in the most dramatic and public way possible, just how wrong they were. The architect was about to demolish the world they thought was so secure. The foundation was already cracked. He just had to decide where to strike the first blow. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in strategic patience. On the surface, nothing changed. Ethan continued his work as a consultant, spending his days in his home office, which was connected by a secure, high-speed line to the Aethelred Design headquarters in another state. Clara continued her job, coming home later and later, her conversations increasingly peppered with mentions of Julian, his successes, his grand plans. The Aethelred Valkyrie became a regular fixture in their driveway, its silent, powerful presence a constant reminder of the growing chasm between them. Ethan endured it all with a preternatural calm. He listened politely as Clara recounted Julian's triumphs. He nodded when she suggested, with a strained casualness, that maybe he should be more proactive in his career. Julian says there's no room for complacency in this economy, she would say, parroting a line he had undoubtedly fed her over $1,000 lunch. Each word was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but collectively they were bleeding him dry. His true work, however, was happening in the quiet hours after Clara went to bed, or in the long afternoons when she was at the office. In the hollowed-out book, on the encrypted tablet, he was no longer a complacent husband. He was a king moving his chess pieces across the board. His first move was subtle. He initiated a deep financial and operational audit of Julian Vance's development company, Vance Properties. Through a labyrinth of holding companies and third-party consulting firms that Aethelred controlled, Ethan commissioned one of the most ruthless forensic accounting teams in the country. He gave them a simple directive: find everything. Every over-leveraged loan, every inflated asset valuation, every handshake deal that skirted the edge of legality. Men like Julian, who built their empires on speed and bravado, almost always left a trail of structural weaknesses behind them. Ethan, the architect, knew that the most impressive-looking towers are often the most vulnerable to collapse if the foundation is flawed. While the accountants dug into Julian's financial bedrock, Ethan focused on the man himself. He knew that Julian was desperate to get an allocation for Aethelred's next model, the Seraph, an even more exclusive and powerful vehicle than the Valkyrie. Production was limited to just 50 units worldwide, and the waiting list was a who's who of global power brokers, tech billionaires, and royalty. Julian saw owning a Seraph not just as a status symbol, but as an ascension to a new level of the global elite. He had been boasting to Clara for weeks that his connections were all but guaranteeing him a spot. Ethan smiled grimly. He was the one who would personally sign off on the final allocation list. Julian's chances of getting a Seraph were zero, but simply denying him wasn't enough. The denial had to be a public spectacle. It had to be the centerpiece of his downfall. An opportunity presented itself in the form of the annual Blackwood Charity Gala, the city's premier society event. This year, Vance Properties was a primary sponsor. Julian was using the event as a platform to announce his most ambitious project yet, the Vance Tower, a spiraling monument to his own ego that he planned to build on the city's waterfront. It was a project built on a mountain of debt and optimistic projections, and Ethan's accountants were already discovering the rot at its core. The gala's organizers had also, coincidentally, reached out to Aethelred Automotive, requesting a vehicle for their live auction. They wanted to auction off a chance to jump the line and purchase a Seraph, a prize that would undoubtedly raise millions for the charity. Ethan's CEO, Marcus Thorne, had initially been hesitant to mix the brand with a developer like Vance, but Ethan had overruled him. "No, Marcus," Ethan had said over a secure video call. "It's perfect. I want you to not only agree, but to announce that the mysterious founder of Aethelred, the man they call Mr. A, will be there in person to present the prize. Marcus, a sharp, impeccably dressed man who had been Ethan's right hand for a decade, raised an eyebrow. "You're ready to come out of the shadows? After all this time? Why now?" "Let's just say a personal matter requires my attention," Ethan had replied, "and I need you there as well. I need you to play your part." He laid out the plan for Marcus, who listened with a growing sense of awe and a little bit of alarm. It was audacious, theatrical, and utterly devastating. It was, as Marcus put it, not just a checkmate, but a flipping of the entire board. The next humiliation came 2 weeks before the gala. Julian was hosting a lavish party at his penthouse for his employees and key investors to celebrate the preliminary approval of the Vance Tower project. Clara insisted that Ethan attend. "It would mean a lot to me, Ethan," she'd said, her voice soft but with an undercurrent of demand. "Everyone will be there. It's important for us to show a unified front." Ethan knew what she meant. It was important for her to show her colleagues and her boss that her husband wasn't a complete recluse. He agreed to go, knowing it would be another trial by fire. The penthouse was a shrine to bad taste and expensive things. Gold fixtures, abstract art that was more about the price tag than the talent, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city he felt he knew more intimately than Julian ever could. And there, in the center of the sprawling living room, cordoned off by velvet ropes like a museum piece, was the Aethelred Valkyrie. Julian had somehow managed to have it transported up in a freight elevator. Julian, holding a glass of champagne, was in his element, gliding through the crowd, accepting congratulations. When he saw Ethan and Clara arrive, he made a beeline for them. "Clara, you look stunning," he boomed, kissing her on both cheeks. Then he turned to Ethan. "Ashford, made it out of the workshop, did you?" He gestured vaguely at Ethan's simple, elegant but unbranded dark suit. "Nice try. You know, I could introduce you to my tailor. He could work wonders, probably." Several of Julian's sycophantic junior executives snickered. Ethan just smiled a thin, patient smile. "I'm fine, thank you, Julian." "If you say so." Julian's eyes swept over Ethan, then landed on his wrist. Ethan wore a simple, vintage timepiece with a leather strap. It had been his father's. It was priceless to him. Julian, of course, wore a watch that cost more than a mid-sized car, a chunk of platinum and diamonds that screamed for attention. "Still wearing that old thing?" Julian said loudly, grabbing Ethan's wrist. "A man's watch tells you his story. This one," he said, pointing to his own, "says, 'I've arrived.' Yours," he paused for dramatic effect, looking around at his audience, "says you're still waiting for the train." The laughter was louder this time. Clara's face was a mask of mortified distress. She looked at Ethan, then at Julian, her mouth opening and closing silently. She was trapped, paralyzed by her fear of disrupting the social harmony, of displeasing the man who wrote her paychecks and who represented the life she now craved. Ethan gently pulled his wrist from Julian's grasp. He looked not at Julian, but at his wife. He looked at her, his eyes holding hers, silently asking her, begging her, to say something, anything, to tell Julian he was being rude, to defend the honor of the man she had promised to love and cherish. Clara's eyes darted away. She gave a weak, fluttering laugh. "Oh, Julian, you're terrible," she said, the words a desperate attempt to frame his cruelty as a joke. "Ethan doesn't care about flashy things." It was a defense that was also an indictment. It painted Ethan as a simple man, content with his simple life, unable to comprehend or achieve the heights Julian had reached. It was a final, devastating betrayal, delivered in the guise of a placation. In that moment, something inside Ethan shifted permanently. The last vestiges of hope he'd held for his marriage, the idea that it could be salvaged, crumbled into dust. He was no longer just seeking justice against an arrogant rival. He was performing a necessary demolition, The life he had with Clara was a faulty structure, and it had to come down. He gave Clara a small, sad nod, a final acknowledgement of her choice. Then he turned his gaze back to Julian, his eyes clear and cold as a winter sky. "You're right, Julian," Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying across the sudden lull in the conversation. "A man's possessions do tell a story, but some stories are more complex than they appear. You should be careful what you read." He then turned, without another word, and walked out of the party, leaving Clara standing beside a suddenly confused Julian, the laughter dying in the air. He didn't look back. He had a gala to prepare for. The final act was about to begin. The days leading up to the Blackwood Charity Gala were thick with a strange, oppressive calm. It was the quiet before a storm, a stillness in the air that promised a violent release. Clara moved through their house like a ghost, her attempts at conversation strained and superficial. She tried to apologize for the party, for Julian's behavior, for her own silence, but the words were weak and hollow. "He was just drunk, Ethan. He didn't mean it," she'd offered one evening. "He meant every word," Ethan replied, not with anger, but with a quiet finality that left no room for debate. "And so did you." The chasm between them was now too wide to be bridged by flimsy excuses. They were living in the same space, but occupying different realities. Clara's reality was centered on the upcoming gala, on the dress she would wear, on the success Julian would project. Ethan's reality was a complex, interlocking mechanism of vengeance, clicking inexorably toward its final, devastating conclusion. The forensic accountants had delivered their final report. It was, as Ethan had suspected, a damning document. Vance Properties was a house of cards, built on wildly inflated projections for the Vance Tower, propped up by a series of high-interest, short-term loans from predatory lenders. The entire enterprise was leveraged to the hilt. The project's preliminary approval, which Julian had celebrated so loudly, was contingent on him securing a final, massive round of funding from a major institutional investor. Ethan now knew that the lead investor Julian was courting, a conservative Swiss banking consortium, was on the verge of pulling out. Their own due diligence had raised red flags, and they were getting nervous. All they needed was one final, decisive push. Ethan spent the day before the gala on a series of secure calls. He spoke with Marcus Thorne, finalizing the choreography for the evening. He spoke with the head of the accounting firm, ensuring a summary of their report would be delivered electronically to the board members of the Swiss bank at precisely 9:30 p.m. the following night. And he made one last call to a man named David Chen, the lead designer for the Seraph's interior. "David," Ethan said, "I need you to pull the preliminary schematics for the Seraph's cockpit, specifically the personalization options for the center console." "Of course, Mr. A. Any particular one?" "Yes," Ethan said, "the one Julian Vance submitted with his preliminary application, the one he thinks is getting him the car." A few moments later, a detailed rendering appeared on Ethan's encrypted screen. It showed the Seraph's minimalist dashboard, and on the center console, where the owner's initials were usually laser-etched into the titanium, was a custom design, a gaudy, stylized JV intertwined with a silhouette of the Vance Tower. It was the pinnacle of narcissistic personalization. "Perfect," Ethan murmured. "Have this ready to project on the main screen tomorrow night, on my signal." The evening of the gala arrived. Ethan dressed with meticulous care. He chose a bespoke suit of deep charcoal wool, perfectly tailored but utterly devoid of any designer logos. It was a suit that whispered quality rather than screaming cost. On his wrist, he wore his father's watch. In his pocket, he carried the small titanium keychain, the replica of his personal sigil. When he walked downstairs, he found Clara waiting. She was breathtaking in a floor-length gown of emerald green, a diamond necklace, a gift from Julian, she had confessed, sparkling at her throat. When she saw Ethan, her eyes widened. She had grown so used to his uniform of quiet sweaters and simple trousers that she seemed to be seeing him for the first time in years. "Ethan," she breathed, "you look incredible." "It's a special occasion," he said simply. The drive to the venue, a grand old museum in the heart of the city, was silent. The unspoken tension was a third passenger in the car. When they arrived, they were met with a sea of flashing cameras and reporters. Julian, who had arrived moments before in his Valkyrie, was already on the red carpet, basking in the attention. He saw them and strode over, grabbing Clara's hand and pulling her to his side for the cameras. He barely spared Ethan a glance, dismissing him as a necessary but insignificant accessory. "Clara, darling, you're the star of the show," he declared for the reporters to hear. He then leaned in and whispered, so that only Ethan and Clara could hear, "Try to keep up, Ashford. This is the big leagues." Ethan simply smiled and stepped back, letting them have the spotlight. He watched them pose, Julian's arm wrapped possessively around Clara's waist. He saw Clara's smile, bright for the cameras but strained at the edges. She looked like a prize, another acquisition to be displayed. Inside, the museum's grand hall had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the city's elite. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. At the far end of the hall, on a raised stage, was the evening's main attraction. It wasn't the band, or the ice sculptures, or even the mayor. It was a car shrouded in a black silk cloth, its sleek, aggressive lines hinted at beneath the fabric. It was the Aethelred Seraph. Julian couldn't take his eyes off it. He was like a child on Christmas morning, vibrating with anticipation. He guided Clara through the crowd, pointing out powerful people he knew, his voice a low thrum of self-satisfaction. "That's Chairman Harding of the Port Authority. I had dinner with him last week. And that's Senator Green. He owes me a favor." Ethan followed a few paces behind, a silent observer in the court of King Julian. He saw Marcus Thorne standing near the stage, talking to the gala's host. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Marcus gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. All the pieces were in place. Julian, feeling expansive, finally turned his attention back to Ethan. "You see, Ashford, this is how the world really works. It's not about drawing lines on paper. It's about power. It's about who you know." He gestured toward the shrouded car. "Tonight they're auctioning off one of those, the Seraph. But I've already got mine locked in. My guy on the inside says the founder himself approved my application." He winked, as if sharing a grand secret. "They say he's a total recluse, never seen in public. They call him Mr. A. Probably some weirdo tech nerd. But he knows who the important players are, that's for sure." Ethan took a slow sip of his water. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," Julian said, his arrogance now reaching stratospheric levels. "In fact, I hear the founder is actually going to be here tonight. A big surprise reveal. Probably wants to be seen with men of my caliber. It's good for the brand." "I'm sure it is," Ethan said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. The gala's host stepped up to the microphone on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the stage. "Tonight we have a very special, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for one lucky bidder," the host announced. "Thanks to the incredible generosity of Aethelred Automotive, we will be auctioning off the right to purchase the very first production model of the upcoming Aethelred Seraph." A wave of excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Julian smirked at Ethan. "Watch this. Amateurs fighting over scraps. It's going to be hilarious." "And now," the host continued, his voice booming, "to tell us a little more about this incredible vehicle and to introduce our very special guest, please welcome the CEO of Aethelred Automotive, Mr. Marcus Thorne." Marcus walked onto the stage to polite applause. He was the picture of corporate elegance, his presence commanding immediate respect. He smiled warmly at the audience. Thank you, Marcus began. The Ethelred Seraph is more than a car. It is a statement about the future of performance and design. It represents the culmination of a singular vision, a vision that belongs to one man. Julian puffed out his chest, preening as if Marcus were talking about him. For years, Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, our founder has chosen to remain private. He believes the work should speak for itself. He is a man who values substance over style, integrity over influence. He is an architect in the truest sense of the word, not just of cars, but of companies, of futures. Ethan felt Clara shift beside him. She was looking at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The word architect had snagged her attention. Tonight, however, is a special night, Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly. And our founder has decided to make a rare public appearance to personally oversee this auction and to make an important announcement about the future of his company. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to introduce to you the founder, the lead designer, and the visionary behind Ethelred Automotive, the man known as Mr. A. Marcus turned and gestured, not to some mysterious figure in the wings, but directly into the audience, directly at the unassuming man in the simple charcoal suit. Mr. Ethan Ashford. A powerful spotlight snapped on, illuminating Ethan where he stood. For a heartbeat, the entire hall was plunged into a stunned, absolute silence. Every head in the room swiveled to stare at the man who had, moments before, been utterly invisible. Julian's smug grin froze on his face, then slowly collapsed as if the muscles holding it up had been severed. His eyes darted from Ethan to Marcus on the stage and back again, his brain refusing to process the information. It was a glitch in his reality, an error message in the operating system of his arrogance. Clara made a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. The diamond necklace from Julian suddenly seemed like a collar. She stared at her husband, at this man she thought she knew, this quiet, unambitious man, and saw a complete stranger. A stranger who was now the absolute center of a world she had so desperately wanted to be a part of. Ethan stood perfectly still in the beam of light, his expression unreadable. The quiet architectural consultant was gone. In his place stood Mr. A, the architect of empires, the ghost in the machine. He held Julian's gaze, and in his eyes, Julian saw not triumph, not anger, but a calm, terrifying certainty. The first blow had been struck. The demolition had begun. The silence in the hall finally broke, not with applause, but with a collective, disbelieving gasp. Ethan took a slow, deliberate step forward, moving out of the small circle he had shared with Clara and Julian, and began to walk toward the stage. The crowd parted before him as if he were a force of nature, their stunned faces a blur on the periphery of his vision. His focus was singular, his purpose absolute. As he walked, the events of the past few months played out in his mind, not as a series of humiliations, but as a list of grievances, a detailed accounting of every slight, every condescending remark, every moment of quiet betrayal. Julian's mockery of his job, the condescension about his car, the sneering remark about his father's watch, and woven through it all, Clara's devastating silence, her complicity, her pity. These were not just insults, they were debts, and he was here tonight to collect. He reached the steps to the stage and ascended them with an unhurried grace. Marcus Thorne stepped back, ceding the spotlight and the microphone to him. Ethan stood before the most powerful people in the city, the light warm on his face. He looked out over the sea of faces until his eyes found Julian. The man looked like he had been struck by lightning, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. Clara stood beside him, frozen, her eyes wide with a dawning horror and 1,000 unanswered questions. "Good evening," Ethan said into the microphone. His voice, amplified by the sound system, was calm and clear, filling the vast hall. It was the same voice he used to discuss blueprints, but now it carried an undeniable weight of authority. My name is Ethan Ashford. For those of you who don't know me, he paused, letting the irony hang in the air. I am the founder of Ethelred Automotive. A fresh wave of murmurs swept the room. He let it crest and fall before continuing. My CEO, Marcus Thorne, is a far more public-facing man than I am. I've always preferred to let the work speak for itself. I am, at my core, an architect. I believe in strong foundations, in structural integrity, and in the principle that what you build should be designed to last. His gaze locked onto Julian's. Unfortunately, not everyone shares this philosophy. Some prefer to build on sand, using flashy facades to hide shoddy workmanship and unstable foundations. They believe that the appearance of success is the same as success itself. They are mistaken. Julian flinched as if struck. The people standing near him instinctively took a small step away, creating a subtle circle of isolation around him. Tonight, we are auctioning off the opportunity to own an Ethelred seraph, Ethan continued, his tone shifting from philosophical to razor-sharp. It is a privilege we grant to a very select few, and the selection process is rigorous. We look for more than just the ability to afford the price tag. We look for individuals who reflect the values of our brand: integrity, discretion, and a respect for true innovation. Arrogance, entitlement, and a desperate need for validation are disqualifiers. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their target. Julian's face, which had been pale, was now flushing a deep, mottled red. He looked like a man drowning in plain sight. We received many applications for the seraph. One in particular stood out. Ethan nodded to the tech booth at the back of the hall. On the massive screen behind him, which had been showing the Ethelred logo, an image appeared. The 3D rendering of the seraph's center console, emblazoned with the gaudy JV and the silhouette of the Vance Tower. A titter of laughter spread through the audience. It was so perfectly, so comically narcissistic that it was impossible to suppress. This design was submitted by a Mr. Julian Vance, Ethan announced, his voice devoid of emotion. He was, I'm told, very confident that his application would be approved. He told people he had an inside track. He believed his influence was enough to secure him a place on the list. Ethan paused, letting the public humiliation sink in. He looked directly at Julian. Mr. Vance, I am the man you would call your inside track. I am the one who personally reviews the final allocation list, and I am here to tell you, in front of everyone, that your application was not just denied, it was rejected on grounds of character. The laughter in the room died, replaced by a shocked intake of breath. This was no longer just a social dressing down. This was a corporate execution. Furthermore, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a colder, more dangerous register, my company has a policy. We do not do business with individuals or organizations that lack financial integrity. This evening, at 9:30 p.m., a full report detailing the creative accounting and precarious financial position of Vance Properties was delivered to its primary potential investor, the Helvetia Banking Consortium. He glanced at his father's watch. It is now 9:35. I imagine they are reading it as we speak. Julian's legs seemed to give way. He stumbled back a step, catching himself on a nearby table. The blood drained from his face. He understood in that instant that this was not just about a car. This was a complete and total annihilation. His tower, his company, his reputation, it was all turning to dust. Ethan wasn't finished. He turned his attention, for the first time, to Clara. She was staring at him, tears streaming silently down her face. He felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, sorrowful finality. I have learned that the things we value most, loyalty, respect, partnership, cannot be bought or demanded, he said, his voice softening slightly, though the words were for the entire room to hear. They must be earned. And when we surround ourselves with those who only value the superficial, we eventually become superficial ourselves. We forget what a strong foundation looks like. We mistake a gilded cage for a home. He looked away from her, back to the stunned audience. The auction for the seraph will proceed as planned. All proceeds will, of course, go to the Blackwood Charities. As for Aethelred Automotive, we will continue to build the future. And we will do so with partners who share our vision of integrity. He gave a final, sharp nod. Thank you. Then he turned, handed the microphone back to a shell-shocked Marcus, and walked off the stage. He didn't look at Julian, who was now being surrounded by hushed, urgent whispers from his investors. He didn't look at Clara, who stood alone, a solitary, weeping statue in her emerald gown. He walked through the silent, parting crowd, out of the grand hall, and into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of Julian Vance's world behind him. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had hit, and everything was broken. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of chaos conducted by Ethan's quiet departure. Inside the gala, the veneer of civility shattered. Julian Vance, who had entered the museum as a titan of industry, was now a pariah. His phone began to ring, a frantic, incessant buzzing that he ignored. His junior partners, who had been laughing at his jokes an hour earlier, now avoided his gaze, huddled in worried clumps, their own fortunes suddenly tied to his sinking ship. He tried to approach Chairman Harding of the Port Authority, the man he'd boasted of having in his pocket. But the older man simply turned his back and walked away, a brutal, public dismissal. Julian's world wasn't just collapsing, it was being erased. The Vance Tower, which had been his monument, was now his tombstone. He knew with the sickening certainty of a condemned man that the Swiss bank would not just pull out, they would likely flag his company for investigation. The predatory lenders who held his short-term debt would call in their loans simultaneously, triggering a cascade of defaults that would bankrupt him within weeks. He had built his empire on a bluff, and Ethan Ashford had just called it with an unbeatable hand. He finally looked for Clara, his last remaining trophy, his beautiful accessory. He saw her standing alone, a circle of empty space around her as people gave her a wide berth, as if her proximity to him was contagious. She was looking at the stage, at the spot where Ethan had stood, her face a canvas of utter devastation. Julian started to walk toward her, a desperate, instinctual move to grab onto the last piece of his old life. But then Marcus Thorne, having regained his composure, stepped back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice firm, "let's not allow a brief, structural reassessment to distract from our charitable purpose tonight. Let the bidding for the Aethelred Seraph begin." The announcement was a mercy killing for Julian's social standing. It shifted the room's focus, allowing him to shrink into the shadows. He saw Clara turn and flee, her emerald dress a slash of color as she disappeared through a side exit. He was utterly, completely alone. Clara ran, heedless of the stairs, her heels catching on the marble floor. She burst out of the side door into a quiet, manicured courtyard, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The cool night air was a shock to her system. She leaned against a cold stone wall, the diamonds on her neck feeling like a lead weight. The past year of her life replayed in her mind, but now it was cast in a horrifying new light. Every condescending word from Julian toward Ethan, every time she had stayed silent, every moment she had felt a pang of shame for her husband's supposed lack of ambition. It was all a grotesque farce. She hadn't been pitying a failure. She had been pitying a king who had chosen to live as a commoner, and she had betrayed him. For what? For a ride in a fancy car? For a necklace? For the approval of a hollow man like Julian Vance? The shame was a physical force, so powerful it buckled her knees. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold paving stones, her designer gown pooling around her like an accusation. She had been so blind, so dazzled by the cheap glitter of Julian's world that she had failed to see the quiet, solid gold of her own. Ethan's final words on the stage echoed in her ears. "We mistake a gilded cage for a home." She was the one in the cage. She had helped build it herself. Ethan, meanwhile, had not gone far. He was waiting in the back of his own car, not the old sedan, but a discreet, armored Aethelred prototype he had driven to the event, parked in a private garage beneath the museum. He sat in the darkness, the silence of the leather and titanium interior a welcome balm. He felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound, aching emptiness. He had won, but he had lost his marriage in the process. The demolition had been necessary, but he was now standing in the rubble of what was once his life. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "It's done," Marcus said, his voice tight with adrenaline. "The bidding for the Seraph hit 4 million. Julian Vance is gone." He evaporated. "And your wife?" "I know," Ethan said quietly. "Give me a few minutes, Marcus, then have security escort her to my location." "Are you sure, Ethan?" "I'm sure." He hung up and stared out at the concrete wall of the garage. He had to face her. Not to forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever, but to close the book. To have the conversation they should have had a year ago. 20 minutes later, a museum security guard tapped on the window. Ethan unlocked the door. Clara slid into the passenger seat, looking small and broken. She had taken off the diamond necklace. It was clutched in her hand. She wouldn't look at him. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the car's climate control. Finally she spoke, her voice a raw whisper. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered. Ethan turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights. "When I first sold my firm, I had a lot of money. I didn't want it to define us. I wanted a real life with you, built on something more than a bank statement. I wanted you to love me, Ethan Ashford, the man, not Mr. A, the bank account." "I did," she whispered, tears beginning to fall again. "I did love you." "For a while," he agreed, his voice gentle but unyielding. "But then Julian came along, and you started to see our life, our real life, as not enough. You started to look at me with disappointment. You let him disrespect me in our own home. You stood by and watched him humiliate me. You chose his world over ours, Clara, over and over again." He paused, letting the truth of his words settle between them. "Tonight wasn't about revenge on Julian. He was just a symptom. It was about showing you the truth, because I couldn't live the lie anymore, and I couldn't live with the woman you were becoming." She flinched, the words a direct hit. She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I was a fool, Ethan. I was so stupid, so blind. I am so sorry." She held out the necklace. It feels disgusting to even touch it." Ethan didn't take it. "A genuine apology is the first step, Clara. But redemption requires genuine change, not just regret. You have to understand why you made those choices. You have to look at the part of you that was so easily seduced by the shallow and the false, and you have to fix it. That's your work to do, not mine." He put the car in drive, the electric motor silently engaging. He pulled out of the garage and into the empty city streets. The gala was over. A world had ended. Another was beginning. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm taking you home," Ethan said, "to our house. After that, I don't know. I need time to think. And so do you." The drive was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was not the silence of tension, but of aftermath. The silence of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, when all that is left is to survey the damage and count the costs. The gilded cage was broken. The question that remained was whether either of them could be free. The weeks that followed the gala were a period of quiet deconstruction. The news of Julian Vance's spectacular implosion was the talk of the city's financial and social circles. The story that leaked out was a simplified but potent version of the truth, that the reclusive founder of Aethelred Automotive had personally and publicly excommunicated the arrogant developer, triggering a financial collapse. Vance Properties filed for bankruptcy within a fortnight. The half-excavated site of the would-be Vance Tower became a stagnant pond, a monument to hubris. Julian himself disappeared from public life, his penthouse sold at auction, his Valkyrie repossessed, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Ethan handled the newfound fame with the same quiet dignity he had handled his anonymity. He gave one, and only one, interview to a respected financial journal, in which he laid out the philosophy of Ethelred Automotive, emphasizing its commitment to integrity, long-term vision, and sustainable innovation. He never once mentioned Julian Vance by name. He didn't have to. The world had connected the dots. His public unveiling had the paradoxical effect of making him seem even more powerful. He wasn't a flashy CEO, but a quiet king, a man who moved with deliberation and purpose. Ethelred's brand value soared. The waiting list for the Seraph became even longer. But his public victory was a hollow echo in his private life. He and Clara lived in the same house, but as courteous strangers. The grand, emotional confrontation had given way to a quiet, painful limbo. Ethan moved into the guest room, creating a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one between them. He needed space, not just from her, but from the wreckage of their shared past. He needed to see if the man he was, and the woman she had become, could ever find their way back to each other. Clara, for her part, began the slow, painful work of introspection that Ethan had demanded of her. She quit her job at what was left of Vance Properties, unable to stomach walking into the building. She sold the expensive clothes and jewelry Julian had given her, donating the money to the Blackwood charity. She started seeing a therapist, trying to unravel the knot of insecurity and ambition that had led her so far astray. She stopped trying to apologize with words. Instead, she tried to show her change through actions. She started cooking Ethan's favorite meals again, leaving them for him without expectation. She began volunteering at a local community design center, helping underprivileged students learn about architecture, the field she had once dismissed as her husband's quaint hobby. She was, in her own way, trying to reconnect with the values she had abandoned, the values that had first drawn her to Ethan. One evening, about a month after the gala, Ethan came home from a long day of meetings at a new local Aethelred office he had established. He found Clara in his old home office, the one he used as his architectural consultant cover. She was surrounded by his old blueprints and sketches from the early days of his career. She wasn't crying. She was just looking at them, a look of profound, sorrowful understanding on her face. "I never really looked at these," she said softly, not turning around. "I mean, I saw them, but I never looked. I never saw the passion, the genius." She finally turned to face him, holding up a detailed sketch of an innovative, low-cost community housing project he had designed pro bono years ago. This is who you are. This has more integrity, more value than 100 Vance Towers." Ethan stood in the doorway, his heart aching with a complex mix of old wounds and new hope. It was the first time she had spoken about his work, his real, original work, with genuine admiration since before Julian. "I was so focused on what I thought we were missing," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "that I missed everything we had. I measured your worth with the wrong ruler, Ethan. I measured it with Julian's ruler, and I am so ashamed." This was different from the frantic, tearful apologies in the car. This was calm. This was clear-eyed. This was the result of deep, painful self-reflection. It was the beginning of genuine change. He walked into the room and stood beside her, looking down at the drawing she held. "It was a good design," he said quietly. "The city council never funded it. They went with a cheaper, flashier proposal from another developer. Of course they did, she said with a sad smile. They used the wrong ruler, too. They stood in silence for a moment, the shared observation a fragile bridge between them. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Clara, Ethan said, the words costing him a great deal. Trust is a foundation. Ours is shattered. Rebuilding it, if it's even possible, will take a long time. I know, she said, nodding, her eyes clear. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it yet. I'm just asking for a chance to earn it back. To show you that I can be a partner worthy of the man who designed this, she gestured to the blueprint, not just the man who builds expensive cars. It was the right answer. It was the only answer that could have mattered. He saw in her eyes not the desperate woman from the gala, but a flicker of the strong, intelligent woman he had first fallen in love with. A woman who had lost her way, but was now fighting her way back. The road ahead was uncertain. The story of their marriage was not over, but its next chapter was unwritten. The satisfying, explosive climax of Julian's downfall had given way to the complex, messy, and far more difficult work of rebuilding a life. Justice had been served, but healing was a different process entirely. It was slower, quieter, and required a different kind of strength. It required the strength of an architect, patiently laying one brick at a time, hoping to build something that would last. And so the story finds its pause, not in a grand finale, but in a quiet moment of profound possibility. We've witnessed a spectacular reversal of fortune, a moment of undeniable vindication. But the true measure of a person isn't just in how they confront their enemies, but in how they navigate the difficult peace that follows. Ethan's journey was not just about exposing a fraud. It was about rediscovering the foundations of his own life and deciding what was worth rebuilding. What do you think? Can a betrayal like Clara's ever be truly forgiven? Can a foundation once shattered ever be as strong again? We would love to read your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. If you found this journey from frustration to vindication to wisdom as compelling as we did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the quiet power of integrity. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.